Welcome to Sports Radio 1310, The Ticket, George DiGianni Train Station Fitness Show. Here with my good friend Jill Lane, sports nutritionist, redefining nutrition. Miss Jill, she's drinking some juice that Samantha made for her this morning. Your comment on that juice, and don't be politically correct.
It's delicious. I've never had juiced Brussels sprouts before. So I'm loving it. Thank you.
Yeah,
it was a treat. Good treat.
Yeah, Erica is a friend of ours now in the studio. Erica, how do you say your last name?
Ramelli.
Erica Ramelli is in the studio. She has a website called Better Health.
BetterHumans.net.
BetterHumans.net. I encourage you to check that out. She is global, a global company that helps people to better themselves. Jill Lane is a sports nutritionist that helps not only children but adults to be their best when they're looking for that competitive edge. There's a website my friend Edwin and I saw just yesterday or the day before about CEOs who are not only competitive but are part of a community, of an exercise community, and they have all these different races and challenges, but only if you're a CEO and you make a minimum, you gross a minimum of $1 million a year, which isn't tough really. And it's this great camaraderie and this focus. But what's great about having you here today, Jill, is that we can help these people, and I'll get into this more later, help these people to become better, maybe without more exercise. Maybe it's not about trying harder, but it's like you say, redefining your nutrition, right?
Absolutely. I actually was this week in Phoenix at a place that works with pro athletes, special ops forces, and CEOs, because they all want to train and be fit, quote unquote, like an athlete.
Right.
So it was really interesting because it was very aligned with what I do. But you get more out of your exercise if the fuel you're putting in your tank is appropriate. The problem is, what the heck is that fuel? It's so confusing to discern that.
Mm-hmm.
And even within sports nutrition, it's been so segmented. And when you go into the typical corner shop that sells supplements, there's giant tubs of a sort of protein powder, and then there's energy drinks. So is that sports nutrition?
Right. Let's talk about that coming up next, and also maybe the pressure you have from all of your comrades who say, oh, you have to do this, you have to use this supplement, you have to drink this, this is what I'm doing, and just because they're great at that particular sport event, whatever that is, doesn't mean it'll work for you. We'll talk more with Jill Lane coming up next. 704 Sports Radio 1310, The Ticket. 713 Sports Radio 1310, The Ticket. George DiGianni Train Station Fitness Show. My good friend Jill Lane is in the studio. She is not just a nutritionist, but she focuses on her customer that is the athlete, the wannabe athlete, even if you're a child. So if you're a parent, you have a child, and you want that child to perform well, or the child saying, hey, mommy, daddy, I'd like to be better at my sport. Tell me what to eat or what to do. Jill can do that, and she'll help you with some of that today. As a parent of an athlete, and you sent this to me, Jill, or we discussed this, how do you get the most out of exercise when the child wants to be better at their sport, but they don't know where to turn? Eating, we think eating your Wheaties is going to make you stronger, but that's not necessarily true. So the marketing to our children, to you as a parent, may be doing one of the things you said, George. It may be affecting their performance. Oh, by the way, it may also be affecting their IQ.
Negatively.
Negatively, right. So talk more about that.
Well, I think the problem is that there's so much information, the parent, or anybody for that matter, doesn't know what's truth and what's really science. And so it's up to, experts, quote unquote, in our industry to try to decipher that, but sometimes even the experts aren't really on the dime with what the truth of the matter is. So how does an athlete, regardless of age, sport, or level, get the most out of their training and their exercise? It's by fueling appropriately. So then what is that fuel? Well, it's, I'd like to kind of first start with, well, what are you not eating? A lot of people are like, well, let's take out this, let's take out this, let's take out this. But it's easier with kids to add first before you subtract.
So I want to back up for a moment. You said feeling appropriately, quote unquote, okay? How do we know what appropriately is? And I know that may sound silly, but how many times have you heard, especially men, say, I don't like vegetables, I've never liked vegetables? Or someone say, I've never slept well, or I've never gone to the bathroom once a day as a female, moving their bowels. Never, right? And it's because usually, I don't want to say it's because, but usually we find whatever the habits were as a child have continued on, and those are the things that you remember for so long. So what does feeling appropriately mean?
Well, good question. I mean, with kids, it's a different conversation. I think everything to do with kids, to your point, that we learn is what we've learned.
Right.
And so, I had a blog post last month that was all about how do you get your kids to quote unquote eat healthier? And it was nothing to do with what's traditionally taught. Like, it's parents, you have to do the healthy thing first.
The child doesn't have
you
a
cannot
driver's
expect
license.
your child to put down the soda, eat
Right.
more broccoli, and eat breakfast if they see you not doing
But
that.
you're not, so you're a parent, and I'm giving you resistance, not purpose, because you know this exists, and I want to know how you deal with this in your daily life and your business. You're a parent, you're like, they just won't eat healthy food, I want them to. Is it often because the parent has devised their own monster of that relationship because of allowing them to do whatever they want to do as a child? Because I see that you have 3 children.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it difficult as a nutritionist slash mother to say, I want them to be healthy like all parents, I want my child to be healthy, but hold on, I want them to be a child also. Have
Sure.
cake, have soda, certain things. And
Yeah.
how do you deal with that?
Well, I kind of do the 80-20 rule. 80% of the time you need to be making your best choices, and 20% of the time you get to be a quote-unquote kid, whatever that means. So if a birthday party comes up, I'm not going to send my kid with a tub of apple slices and have them sitting there and the other kids pointing and laughing, because there's some psychological impact to that.
Right.
And I don't want to develop a negative behavior to food going forward. I think all of us should take that into account. And back to what I was saying before, you have to talk to the kids when they say, oh, I don't like this or I don't like that. And it's the same thing for adults, but it's especially important for kids. You have to make it interesting and worth something to them. And here's an example. I'll have a parent come in, they have a young athlete, teenage or younger, that doesn't like eating vegetables. But if that kid knew that he might be able to run and finally beat out that guy on the team for the starting position that he wants, if he eats his vegetables, which is going down to his level and making it worth it to him, and his things are important to him, that may change the game. And that's what I teach, and it works.
It's what you're working on is their motivating drivers. It's the same thing
Yes.
when we were younger. You and me, even though you're not in my age, when we were younger, we would say, or parents would say, eat your spinach if you want to be strong like Popeye.
Exactly.
Right, and so we know that there's some correlation to that. And so finding what their motivating drivers are, and if your child is not an athlete, let's just pull away for a moment. And your child would like to just feel better in school, be able to pay attention. They're not so erratic. Maybe they want to sleep better at night, and not be a troublemaker. Nobody wants to be that. Sometimes it's due to the foods that they're putting in their body, especially during the day if they have access to candy and soda and so on like that. So if you say, look, Johnny, if you want to get better grades, it's not that you're not smart, you're very smart, but maybe if we introduce these type of foods and pull some of this out, it might work. What do you think about trying that for a couple of days?
I know it works because my daughter, my oldest, is 7. She's not an athlete. I mean, she's just starting. She's active, but she's not a formal athlete by my definition. And she was starting to boycott eating protein and chickens and things like that, but she was getting really into painting her nails and doing her hair. So I said, hey, did you know that chicken and eggs, those things, they help your hair and nails grow? Boom. That meant something to her because that's what she was quote unquote into in that time. And so it changed her perspective on what her food was doing for her, which is how we should look at food. It does stuff for us. And to your point of, if you don't want to eat, don't eat as much candy, don't eat as much this or that. Sometimes, like I said before, it's not let's pull all of that out, because sometimes we're addicted, and the kids are too, to those mini highs we're getting from that stuff all day. Let's first add what we're missing. So let's get some protein or some healthy fat at breakfast to keep your blood sugar level, and then probably 2 hours later you won't want to go crazy on the Skittles because you're having a hypoglycemic event at school. So adding first before you subtract and making it important to the kid and what they're into are things that I've found successful in my own little pod at home and in the kids that I teach, whether they're athletes or not. Because whether you're an athlete or not, it kind of doesn't matter. There's some difference in your macronutrient ratios you take in, but physiology is physiology. And the way food works in our body doesn't change whether you're in chess club or you're the star quarterback football player.
Right. And so I agree with you, because I've said for quite a while it's about empowering the person to change, find out those motivating drivers, right? When you talk about redefining nutrition, Does that mean we're supposed to eat different food? What does redefining nutrition mean?
Well, it's redefining sports nutrition, really, and it's just my pet peeve of the fact because my business has evolved to working with very elite athletes, well-known household names, and even for them, I've had to redefine what it means because the standard set of, okay, what's sports nutrition or what am I going to get from my sports nutrition is here's your giant tub of protein powder, and how can we figure out how to get you more energy? And I don't roll like that at all, and it's really how I work with all of my clients, and it is to figure out what do you innately need through testing and surveying and questionnaires or whatever your modality is within your scope. You and I both know a lot of healthcare practitioners who operate this way, but when it comes to sports nutrition, you have to figure out where someone's hole in their bucket is. If they're deficient in magnesium, which is very common, and they need more fish oil, which is extremely common, you can give them all the whey protein they can chug, they're still not going to be optimally performing for their physiologic need unless you fill their holes and their gaps first. So my business is all about kind of redefining what sports nutrition means, and it's not about, I use protein powders, don't get me wrong, but we never start there, never.
So then what type of person qualifies to work with Jill Lane? It's obviously not a child or an adult, it's more defined than that. Who is your client? Is it just someone who wants to be an athlete? Are they an athlete? Is it high-end, high-level athlete? What is that?
Well, that's a good question. You know, really my business is taking in pro and elite athletes at this time, but I really work with anybody. I always keep it what I call a handful of difficult weight loss cases because that's a real metabolic challenge, and it's not calories in, calories out, as you know. It's hormones, and it's emotional stuff, and it's a lot of gut issue, and it's insomnia, and it's more hormones.
Right. And type of calories and timing of calories.
Absolutely.
And all
so
that.
we're sorting through all of that, and we're actually repairing metabolic function. But really, the athletes that I work with have the exact same physiology, but because they are very good looking on the outside, no one knows that they have adrenal fatigue. They're just pushing themselves because they know how to do that. An athlete knows how to overcome pain and fatigue because that's part of what they have to do to be successful, especially at the elite level. But the scary thing is that the teen athletes I'm starting to see have the exact same problem. Major adrenal fatigue, major dysmenorrhea in the female athletes that I'm working with, major issues with their gut, a lot of infections. And so what I normally used to see in my quote-unquote troublesome weight loss clients is becoming the norm, and the higher level, more advanced teenage and high school athletes I'm working with, and is the norm in all the pro athletes regardless of NFL, NBA, or Major League Baseball that I work with. It's pretty fascinating.
So I would say, just to go off on a small tangent for a moment, that the most unfit or adrenally challenged athlete is probably a hockey player.
You know, I don't have a lot of experience with hockey players, to be honest with you, but I would, in my subset, which is mostly NFL, baseball, and basketball, NFL is by far the ones I find the most abnormal hormonal stuff going on too. So whether that's the fact that their brain is getting slammed all the time and their pituitary and everything's out of whack and it's starting there, or if it's literal overtraining, undernutrition, not sleeping well, and it's the standard entry into how we get to that. I think it's both in football and in hockey. I would say the same. And I would probably suspect if I didn't see testing that the NBA or hockey might be worse because they train and practice almost every day. There's very little recovery
so
time.
JJ McQueen is the strength and conditioning coach, and I've worked with JJ a few times. I've worked with some of the players also, and they're constantly working their lower body, which they need to for skating. They're working their entire body, so I don't want to take anything away from JJ's training. He really is an incredible trainer. The problem is they're required to train so often and play at that competitive level that they're constantly overtraining.
There's no recovery.
From the day they start their first professional game in the season, they're becoming deconditioned.
Yeah.
From that day forward.
Yeah.
Just imagine, and I even said this to JJ, and I don't want to mention what his comment was, I don't want to get him in trouble, but just imagine if you took away some of the training, helped them to recover, and allowed them to play all those games, that if one team did this, they'd play better.
Yeah, well, it's been proven, actually, and it's starting to very, very slowly happen in the NFL. I have 2 clients on one team. They're new to this team, and I was shocked and elated at the same time to find out that they actually wear heart rate monitors and heart variability monitors while they train, And if they go over their heart rate range, and if they notice the trainers that they are in that place, they will give them a day off. That is where it should be when it comes to training, and even in kids, because kids are overtraining. Why? Because we're not doing recovery. You can train hard, train your butt off. That's how you get better, but you have to recover equally, if not more, so that you can train harder the next time. And I think that's the biggest thing that's slowing down our kids, is the lack of recovery in addition to the nutritional deficits.
Do you believe more exercise will make you faster, stronger, better, more competitive, the winner? What if we told you that getting that edge that you're searching for might come in the form of changing your eating habits? Do you struggle with this because your friends are having some energy drinks, they're living a certain way, and when I say friends, I'm talking about your competitive athlete friends. They're doing certain things that they need to do or think they need to do because that's what they're doing. And so if their friends are doing it, they think they need to do it. What if you made a change? What does that look like? We'll talk more with Jill Lane coming up next. 726 Sports Radio 1310 The Ticket. 734 Sports Radio 1310 The Ticket. George DiGianni, Train Station Fitness Show. My guest in the studio is Jill Lane. She's a sports nutritionist. She helps athletes, high-level athletes, to be their best. But she also helps parents of children and children to be their best. And we were just discussing her professional athletes and some of the challenges they have. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, I know that there's a lot of superstition in certain, if not all, pro athlete sports. And especially the hockey players, only because I'm familiar with them, they have a superstition of wearing either a certain shirt or doing a certain thing when they win a game, and they keep doing it for however long, right? And so I suspect that if your biggest challenge dealing with athletes that are pro athletes is stopping whatever their superstition is to make them play their best. I remember when they were using my 21-day body makeover program, they would do it during the summer. They got great results, but they didn't want to continue those. They wanted to continue the results, but they didn't want to continue with what brought the results because they had in their mind they had to do something else to play at a certain level. Do you find that that's your biggest challenge, is helping the pro athlete to think differently about how they can play their best and moving them away from the superstition of what they think they have to do, especially with what their teammates are doing?
No.
Really?
No.
I went through all of that for nothing?
You know what? That's not my biggest challenge with my pro athletes. I mean, normally you never get a pro athlete during the midst of their season, and so you're not changing up anything and trying anything on new during the season, which would be more of a challenge.
But I mean, continuing from the summer or out of season on into their season.
Yeah, and you know what? If I have trouble with them continuing, it's not due to superstition, it's just due to taking action. Because their schedule changes, they're traveling more, and so they're where they were in one place and it was easy, it becomes more difficult. So it's less superstition, it's more just let's figure this out, how to do it on the road. The only time I might get some superstition pushback is in a pregame meal, because I always eat Jill.
What did you just say?
I
always eat Jill.
Davey,
I know you want to lock that one up for the future.
This is what I always eat before my games. 10 bowls of pasta with 10. I'm over exaggerating, but that's where we try it on for size a little bit more in the off season, and then we work. So that might be the last thing I can get my hands on is a guy's pregame meal.
Yeah.
But generally, because they've seen improvements in their off season training, they're okay. They're ready to just change that too.
So let's get back to a question we addressed in the beginning of the show. What are parents doing, maybe not on purpose, but what are they doing to their child that actually decreases their ability to be competitive in sports and decreases their child's IQ?
Well, it's a list of 5 things. I mean, I think the first thing is what I assume we all hear a lot about, is just pumping their kids with too much sugar. And
then here's the irony. I don't think any parent is doing this on purpose.
Right.
Some parents do it to shut the kid up because they're saying, mommy, 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 daddy, 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 or they're complaining and they just here. And some parents do it because they've not considered, they're not aware of making it the change or how much it's affecting the child, right? I'm sure there's other motivating factors or other reasons that it's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we all can agree upon the fact that, sugar or sodas and things like that, most people, I think, would understand that they're unhealthy if consumed, multiple times throughout the day. But people don't consider the fact that if my kid's just having orange juice and cereal for breakfast, that's equivalent to a soda.
But it's orange juice, Jill.
I
Oranges are healthy. I don't care if there's 85 oranges in my drink. It's orange juice.
And the other excuse I hear is, well, they're kids, Jill,
Well, no, you
and
have
they're
to
athletes.
you have to rebut that. Hold on. don't let me go with that. I'm being sarcastic on purpose.
I understand.
Well, you understand, but other people might not. This is a learning show.
Well, I know. So here's the deal. It doesn't matter the source of the sugar. The body physiologically will have a very specific hormone response. So I don't care if it's a cup of sugar or a Gatorade or a soda. They all have the same amount of sugar, between 20 and 40 grams, which is 10 or more teaspoons.
And orange.
So the body responds to all of that in a very similar hormonal fashion. So it doesn't matter how it comes in. I don't care if it's agave or if it's straight table sugar. It has a similar physiologic response if overconsumed. Now, there's some things you can do to change that response, like eat protein with it, eat some healthy fats with it. And so that's where we add before we take away.
So some of the extreme thoughts, I want to interrupt on purpose, some of the extreme thoughts that a parent might have is, well, hold on. Does that mean that oranges or fruit isn't good for me in the first place because you're saying it's just sugar? And I think the takeaway is, like you said, mix it with another macronutrient, a good fat, a good protein. Oh, by the way, have the fruit.
Right.
With the fiber, not just the juice. If it takes 5 or 6 oranges to make a cup of orange juice, and I gave you 5 or 6 oranges, would you say that's too much? Many people would say, I don't want 5 or 6 oranges. Well, why are you drinking it?
Exactly.
Right. Let's get to the basics.
So when you put protein, fat, and fiber with a sugar, whatever it is, fruit juice to white bread, to candy bars to soda, it completely changes how the body handles those things hormonally. And that's really important because the hormonal response to food is what dictates how we feel. Do we have a sugar crash? Do we have steady energy? Do we refuel glycogen stores, which is what an athlete's interested in? That all depends upon what you eat with that carbohydrate. So for a kid who you want to have sustained energy, because not only are they going to school for 6 or 8 hours, but now they have 2 hours of practice and more hours of study, you don't want their blood sugar to waver because that's where you lose brain power. Not to mention energy, and you get fidgety and all the stuff that all these kids are doing in school these days, athlete or not. So if you put a protein and a healthy fat like an almond butter, a nut butter on that toast, and you maybe take away the juice and just, they just drink water, maybe they stick with their cereal, but you're adding a couple hard-boiled eggs, that completely changes the game. We don't have to take an F diet to an A overnight. We just need to slowly upgrade it by adding things, and when you start feeling better, it's easy to let the other stuff go. A kid can even tell that.
Can we be detailed? I know you said a nut butter, so we're talking about peanut butter or almond butter or walnut butter, but not everyone's going to go to the healthy grocery store and get these things. They'll get the Skippy or the Jif or anything like that. Does that perform the same action? I know how both of us feel about that. Do we want to be detailed, or is it giving parents too much to say, hey, if you're going to do a nut butter, which is great, you need to stick with this type? Is it too much information at first?
It can be. It depends on who I'm talking to. It depends on how they came in, like we were talking in the break. If someone's just trying to figure out how to get normal stuff on their table, then I'm not going to be specific. I'm going to say just go get the nut butter. If someone's already doing that and they want to get an upgrade, I'm going to say, okay, get the natural nut butter. And if someone's already doing that, then I'm going to say, get the almond butter, get the organic stuff. So you got to meet people where they're at. But you can't let that be the excuse, because chances are if that costs an extra $1 and I'm going to switch out something, they're going to save the $1 here and they're going to reinvest it over into this better food they're going to get more longevity from.
Who's more disciplined in their nutrition, an adult athlete or a child athlete?
That's a really good question.
I find, let me give you my experience, and you may say the same, and anybody in this room. I find when I was younger, I was more disciplined because you're full of all of this information coming in. You don't have those superstitions maybe, or whatever your friends are doing that's most important because you want to stand out. But then again, today, it might be the adult because the adult knows better. The adult wants that information now because we're different today, and the child now is overcome by all these crappy foods, and it may be hard for them to change, or maybe they're not as competitive. It's just a guess.
You know what? I would agree to some extent with what you said, but I would say I I would almost go 50-50, but I would lean more on the kids because of peer pressure. If they're going to go from eating their crappy school lunch to packing, there's psychosocial, emotional stuff involved with that. I know I was the one with the stinky, tuna in the brown sack. I was that kid growing up, and I thank my mom that she never wavered just because I was tired of taking that. I was the one with the whole grapefruit shoved in there and all this stuff, and so probably is why I do what I do today. But there's more psychosocial, emotional stuff with kids if the parents don't create a really loving, like, this is why we're doing it sort of a thing, and empowering the kid to maybe start sharing with their friends. But on the flip side, with the pros, they know better because they're adults, but they have peer pressure too, and they have a ton of money, and they can get access to anything they want at any time. And so the more disciplined, and you would think all pro athletes are disciplined, but not necessarily, the more disciplined they are. And in today's pro athlete world, the difference between first and second is slimmer than it's ever been. So it's starting to change where more guys and gals in the pros are looking for whatever edge so they can legally take, and food is kind of the new it thing, which I'm happy about. I wish it would have started a longer time ago, because they're suffering illnesses in some of these professional sports like NFL. They're dying early after their career starts. There's catastrophic stuff happening to some of these athletes, which is why redefining sports nutrition is not just so this guy can score more touchdowns and make more money. It's so he can actually live a normal life into his 70s and 80s without brain disease and heart disease and obesity and emotional problems. So it's more than that for me when I work with these
You
guys.
have about a minute, and I want to make sure we have enough time in the last segment to cover more. But what are the top 3 strategies a sports-minded family must know?
First is one we already covered. The parents have to model good behavior.
Right.
And so if you want little Johnny to be faster, stronger, bigger, then you have to do the things you expect him to do. It doesn't mean you're out there benching,
Right,
but it's
children
the food.
learn by example, not
The
what
second
you
is to
tell
get
them.
the kids involved. Get
Right.
them involved. Have them pick out a vegetable. Have them Google search a recipe. Have them chop, cook, clean. My husband's a chef, and my 7-year-old wields that butcher knife sometimes. It scares the death out of me. But whatever she cooks, she eats. And so I've seen that firsthand, that works. And then the third is try and try again. If you fail at something, you try the Brussels sprouts and they're like, no way, I can smell them coming down the hall. Don't just throw in the towel, because like you said earlier in the show, if you start sliding down that path of less and less vegetables, it's harder to get them back in.
Really
It's a
is.
harder uphill climb. So don't give up. Keep trying, elicit help from somebody. Model behavior, model behavior, model behavior. I
Right.
think that's the biggest thing.
So I've noticed I hate Brussels sprouts. There's certain vegetables I just absolutely will not eat. And one of the things Samantha and I do is juice. I've been talking about juicing for the past several years. And so what I'll do is I'll put that in my juice with beets and everything else that I have in there, and it's masked. I don't taste the Brussels sprouts, but I know I'm getting all the benefits from it. So I have an Omega juicer. It's called a masticating juicer. Don't twist those words. And so we'll talk more with Jill Lane coming up next, because I want to talk about preparing your kids for family sports and also adults, where this is not just a child show, and also carb loading. Do we need to carb load? Aren't we just a big walking carb? What is that? We'll talk more with Jill Lane coming up next. 746 Sports Radio 1310 The Ticket. 754 Sports Radio 1310 The Ticket. George DiGianni, Train Station Fitness Show. My guest in studio is Jill Lane. You can go to JillLane.com. She is redefining sports nutrition. What does that mean? We talked about it earlier. You'll find this show loaded on Facebook and YouTube and probably Twitter also at some point here in the near future. Are you a big walking carb?
I love that.
You love that? Don't use it. I'm going to use it at sometime in the
Trademark.
future. And so anyway, so should we carbohydrate load? Aren't we all just a big walking carb, because that's all we eat are carbohydrates, regardless of whether it's bread or candy or soda? We're a big walking carb. How many women love protein? No, they don't. You might eat some vegetables, but we talked about those macronutrients: protein, fat, carbohydrate. They work synergistically. It's good to have them in each meal. Does an athlete, whether you're a child or an adult, need to carbohydrate load? I guess it depends on the goal, but what does that look like if the answer is yes?
Well, my answer is no.
Okay.
There's one exception to the rule, and I'll get to that. Because if you eat, like you said before, protein, carbohydrates, and fat at each meal, and technically athletes, if they meet my definition of an athlete, which we can get to also, eat more carbohydrates than the average person, because they do use it as their primary fuel source, but they're using it. The average person is not using their carbohydrates for extended periods of training and exercise.
Like the cyclists that do 50 miles or hotter than hell with the 100-mile races.
Yeah,
What-
a couple
they're doing-
hours
they're
or
doing
more
the
a
goo.
day. You're doing, yeah, because you need it. That's
Right.
your primary energy source. You're going to burn fat for fuel after you go through that, and so you have to train to be an efficient fuel burner for both.
Sure.
But if an athlete is appropriately eating the amount of carbohydrates they need based on the equations I teach and the amount of hours they train, plus their protein, plus their vegetables, their stored glycogen, which is how we store sugar in our body, their glycogen stores should be filled. So if they're following my program and my equations, which are free on my website, then your glycogen stores, which is where we store sugar as sugar, should be filled. So if your glycogen stores are filled, why do you need to take in more carbohydrates? Why
Because
do you
it
need
tastes
to
good. I
load?
want some damn tiramisu cake, Jill.
Yeah, it's just an old. So I think who it might benefit, people who are just eating poorly and their fuel stores are depleted, and they are going to be dead and have no energy before their whatever it is starts.
Let's explain that, because this is going to be real important. We don't have much time, but I think we can do it. I just said I want some tiramisu, and you said some people might need that because they're depleted. Talk about that.
Well, if your suitcases in your muscle, which is where we store sugar in our liver and our muscle, as sugar, if we eat too much sugar, those are full, then we store sugar as fat. That's not good for an athlete, but it's what's the problem with the rest of the world is. For an athlete, which can have weight issues, who just, so let's say an athlete who doesn't have weight issues, they just have energy issues and they have trouble keeping weight on, which is a big deal with kid athletes. And so the parents are like, just eat all the ice cream you want, little Bobby, just eat. And I'm like, no, that's not the proper caloric way to add weight to somebody. They need to eat calorically dense stuff like healthy fats, extra protein, lots of essential fatty acids, which is a big way to keep the IQ up and to keep brain health up. But when it comes to keeping your glycogen stores full, if you haven't been fueling appropriately, which is most athletes, and you've spent all your stored energy, which is the glycogen in your muscles and in your liver, and you're completely depleted, and now you're in a tournament and you have another game, or you just have a football game on Sunday, you may need some carbohydrates. Do you need to load by eating bowls and bowls and pasta? No, it generally doesn't take that. Should you have a tiramisu? Probably not, because that sugar has no fiber attached to it, and depending on what time you eat it, your sugar is going to go up and then it's go back down. Now you could be hypoglycemic, which is even worse to start the game.
So someone who might disagree with that, especially if they model this person, is Michael Phelps. Had pizza, pasta, ice cream. He had everything he wanted, 10,000 calories a day, because he used it. But you're saying, well, hold on. Protein and fiber and essential fatty acids? Come on, Jill. I just won all these Olympics.
So then my rebuttal to that is, well, he missed out on a couple gold medals.
Right. I
How do
said
we
the
know-
same thing several times.
And
He
how
didn't
do we
perform
know-
the best he possibly could have.
How do we know that he couldn't have had a faster time,
Right.
more medals? We
Right.
don't know. We don't. But if there's room for improvement as an athlete, why not take it? Why not improve your fuel source? Because it's like a fire or a car, a high-end car and high-end gasoline. You're burning it more efficiently. And for an athlete, recovery is like everything.
Is there a symptom someone can recognize to know whether they need a sports drink or a sugared food?
Well, sports drinks and sugar foods are different. So
Right.
sports drinks, because they also
Fast.
serve as electrolytes, should be consumed after training only. If you lose more than 2 pounds of weight, so weigh in, weigh out, whether you're a pro or a student, weigh in, weigh out after training and competition. If you lose more than 2 pounds, you need water per pound, 20 ounces, and an additional sports drink.
Okay.
If you need carbohydrates, do you need carbohydrates before? Well, if you haven't been getting any in
Right.
your meals before that, or if you've been all over the place, or you had a hard training the day before a competition, you may need more carbohydrates than you normally get in. But I don't call it loading, I call it refueling.
Good.
It's just a switch in how we think of it. We
Good.
need to refuel to get to the next session.
Thank you. Jill Lane, go to jilllane.com.